I'm Joshua Rosenberg, and I'm here at 4 PB Chambers in the City of London to interview their joint head, Barbara Mills, KC, who's about to take over as Chair of the Bar Council. Barbara, before I ask you about your plans for the year ahead, I'd like to ask you a little bit about yourself and your work. 4PB is a leading set of family chambers, and I gather it's 35 years since a family lawyer became chair of the bar. Why do you think that is?
Joshua, I don't know why it's taken 35 years since Robert Johnson was chair of the bar, but what I can tell you is that the family law community is very energised about my election, and I feel the weight of their support in the direction that I've taken in becoming chair of the bar.
And it's not just the family law bar that is energised. You're the first person of colour to be chair of the bar. Tell me a little bit about your family, your upbringing.
I was born in Ghana and we moved with my mother when I was a child. Political circumstances in Ghana meant that she brought her children out of that country for safety reasons. I enjoyed school because I was fortunate enough to get a bursary to a very good boarding school in Hertfordshire. And that was one of the foundational stones for everything that I do, because the school that I went to was a fee-paying school. We were only able to go there as a result of the generosity of a charitable foundation.
And that continued to support you when you moved towards your legal career at university and so on?
Yes, and it taught me a great deal about sponsorship and championing, because that charitable foundation educated my sister and I at that school. They continued to look after me throughout university, and they let go of me when I was called to the bar on the basis that I was then pretty much on my feet and I could get on with it.
And why did you decide to become a barrister?
Well, I come from the sort of family where being a professional was everything. Neither of my parents had been to university, but they were both very aspirational. I was a great reader. I was a quiet child who was a great reader. And some of my father's relatives were lawyers in Ghana. They would say to me that I would become a lawyer. It was always going to be a barrister, because that's, the wig and gown was everything. As a child at school, I found my voice at school. I began to do a little bit of acting and then into debating, and just began to love the idea of advocacy and persuasion with words. And really that was the beginnings of it.
And family law, was that what you did at the outset, or is that something you moved towards?
No, I've always been a family lawyer. So I studied at Hull University, and one of the modules I took was family law. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. While I was at university, I also did some charity work, which involved helping families. 4 Paper Buildings, as we then was, where I did my pupillage, was a common law set at the time, but my pupil, mistress and master, I'm showing my age now, were both family law juniors who were doing the very best of work. And Jonathan Cohen, who became Mr. Justice Cohen, was doing family financial remedy work, and Anna Porfley, who became Mrs. Justice Porfley, was doing children work. And between them, I was exposed to the very best of family law. And so the rest of the work that I had, employment and civil and so on, really didn't play much of a part, and family was what I then focused on.
You mentioned financial remedies, but that's not the sort of work you do at the moment, is it?
No. So I did all aspects of family law for about 10 years. And then I chose to specialise in children work. 5 or 10 years into that specialism, I decided to qualify as a mediator. And at the time, not many barristers were also mediators. In fact, when I told my senior clerk, who remains my senior clerk, when I told him I was going to train to be a mediator, he looked at me with a puzzled look and he said, "Barbara, here we go to court. We don't stop people from going to court." And I said with a confidence I didn't really know where it came from, but I said, "The people who instruct me now to go to court will instruct me not to." And so it has been that I then received instructions from High Court judges, and cases were referred to me from solicitors, and I also built up just from direct access work.
Mediation is private, and I suppose some people don't really know what it involves. So just give me an idea of mediation in family law, would you?
Mediation is not reconciliation, for sure. Mediation is a way in which a couple who find themselves at issue with each other, often about their children or the money side of their divorce or separation, sit together with a third party, a neutral, a mediator, who facilitates their conversation. It is often thought of as a soft option, but I can tell you that sitting with two people who no longer like each other, but are so committed to their family life being reshaped that they're prepared to sit in that discomfort and work through. And actually, when a couple can do that, it sets them up well for the future.
Do they start in separate rooms at the beginning of the day and maybe you bring them together?
It can do. So the process involves me speaking to the couple separately before, because I have to make sure that mediation is something that is useful to them and that there are no issues, for example, domestic abuse, which will make it wrong to put them in the room together. So if there is, for example, domestic abuse, but there's still willingness to speak, you can start separately. So you have initial meetings, then you bring them in jointly. But if, for example, there are domestic abuse issues, then they'll sit in separate rooms and you shuttle between them. But the very best mediation is where there are no safeguarding concerns of that type, so that you can have them in the room together and so that they can each hear what the other has to say. I mean, I'll give you an example of a case where the father was insistent that he must have exactly equal shared care. And the mother was saying, no, you can have 4 out of 14 nights during the school term. When they got into the room together and he was able to explain to her that what drove him to want 50% was a desire not to be cut out of decision making. So he wanted to feel equal to the mother. It resolved the issue. So they were able to negotiate from that basis because the mother was able to say, of course, you will remain an important part of the decision making. They put in some constructive proposals as to how they'd actually do that, how they would communicate with each other through emails and sitting together once a month. And it unlocked the difficulty, which was something that if it had played out in court, would have required them to write statements about each other, drawing attention to the other's negative aspects or negative traits, whereas being able to talk one to the other resolved the issue for them after a series of meetings.
A quick question back to your career. You're now at the very top of your career. You're about to be chair of the bar. You're joint head of these chambers. Has your career been difficult? Have you had to make sacrifices for your career?
I've had to make choices as my career has evolved. I'm a mother. When I came back from having my daughter, that was at a time when we didn't have policies in place that would assist you to return seamlessly. We didn't have an idea of how much you paid by way of rent while you were away. All of those things had to be navigated. I realized that I wanted to be the sort of mother who was as hands-on as possible without sacrificing my career. So the choice I made was to work pretty full-time during the school term and take most of the holiday off. And I was able to do that because actually when you're in court and you're listing cases in the future, you need only say, I'm not available. What I found incredible was nobody said, where will you be? They just assumed that I was doing another case. So there was definitely that sacrifice for a period of time in doing less work in the holidays or no work at all in order to be present for my daughter.
But it didn't damage your career, crucially.
No, it didn't damage my career because I was fortunate enough to be agile and to have a clerk who was able to move with me as I changed and wanted different things. So one of the things I did, as I've said, was mediate. That meant that I had less to do by way of prep, so evenings and weekends were freed up. But of course, it meant that because I was starting the mediation career, I couldn't charge anything like I could for paid work that was in court. So there were those sacrifices, but what I got was able to be more available.
And why did you get involved in bar politics? Why are you spending the next year working for barristers rather than clients?
When I started off, I was invited to join the Conduct and Complaints Committee, as it then was, that before we had the BSB and separation of regulation and so on. So I was introduced fairly early on to that. I was struck by the work, the length and breadth of work that Bar Council did. I was struck by the fact that government and policymakers were interested in what the Bar Council did. I'm interested in doing the work for Bar Council because I have something to say by virtue of my experiences at the bar. I knew no lawyers in the profession. I only managed to qualify with the assistance of a charitable foundation. I had on my side hard work, ability, and resilience. There was a lot of light and shade, but the light, which is what I focus on, were allies who were prepared to champion me and show me the way, provide me with opportunities, especially introductions to solicitors and work. And even though there were naysayers who, when I said I was going to London from Hull University to be a barrister, they said, okay, here I am. And I think that is a story that is worth telling, because from what people tell me, it inspires those who think it is important to see something to believe that it is possible. So I think in the end, I represent what is possible.
When you were elected vice chair of the bar in the summer of last year, you said you had two priorities: to continue the work on equality, diversity and inclusivity, EDI, and to raise the profile of the publicly funded family bar. Let's start with equality, diversity and inclusivity. How much progress has there been, and what still needs to be done?
At the time I spoke, I was the co-chair of the race working group, now the race panel. In 2021, when we produced the snapshot of race at the bar report, we provided data and statistics which gave us the picture so far. They, the race panel, have recently produced an updated report in which we can see that the black and brown barristers, the percentages is increasing 0.5 at a time. We can see that in the space of leadership, which is an important space in terms of representation and what it means to people, that is improving. I am, after all, going to be chair of the bar next year. England and Wales is divided into 6 circuits. 2 of those circuits, the Northeastern Circuit, is led by Jason Pitter, KC. The Midland Circuit is led by Harpreet Sandhu, KC. Both are men of colour. Amrit Danoa, chair of the Young Bar Committee, is a woman of colour. So in terms of representation in that field, it is good and improving, and we have much to celebrate. In terms of who gets pupillage, that too is improving. Those who get tenancy, not so good. The experiences of ethnic minority barristers is still something that needs to be looked at. People still feel not included, still feel othered. The pay gap is an issue that we need to look at, in the sense that we know now from the reports, including the 0 to 3 years report, that women continue to earn less than men from the very beginning. And ethnic minority women, Asian and Black women, earn least of all. So there is progress, steady progress, but there is still work to do, and we need to double down on that work.
3 months ago, your regulator, the Bar Standards Board, launched a consultation on replacing a core duty for barristers. At the moment, members of the bar are told they can't discriminate unlawfully against any person. The regulator wants to impose a new duty on barristers to act in a way that advances equality, diversity and inclusion. Well, before we get on to whether that's a good idea or not, can you tell me what you think the Bar Standards Board is getting at? What are they trying to achieve here?
I think, because that's all I can do, because we weren't able to look at the proposals before they were pushed out in a consultation. I think they want what the Bar Council wants, which is a profession that reflects the society it serves, one that is diverse, one that invites people from underrepresented groups into the profession, and they can expect to be treated well and included. I suspect that that's what they want, and I have no quarrel at all with that aspiration and that commitment. But I have a huge difficulty with the proposals as set out.
Tell me about that.
The Bar Council, you will know, has set out its comprehensive response to that consultation. I am only interested in initiatives which will move the dial forward. And I fear that the proposals as set out where you question the legality of them. Do they go far too far beyond the BSB's remit and scope? Where it has within it promoting and advancing used interchangeably without understanding what each means. Where you have a situation where they're moving on to outcomes based without setting out clearly what good would look like. And the implication for the practitioner is that if you fall foul of this, it would lead to disciplinary proceedings. It cannot be right, and it's an affront to the independence of a practitioner to not understand what it is that might cause them to be before a disciplinary. It will be quite unenforceable, this set of proposals. What is it already done, which is a great sadness to me, is it has created the most enormous division. People have taken onto social media and have written to the chair and I and have expressed deep disquiet with the consultation in the way that goes to the heart of equality, diversity. People are questioning it and pushing back in a way that we would say had been accepted. Certainly when we produced our race report, there wasn't a pushback. What we did with the race report was raised awareness as to the issue. We moved it from anecdote to here is the hard data. There was acceptance, and across the bar, there was a real stepping up to the plate. You had the commercial bar creating scholarships, positive actions, scholarships for Black talent to enter into that profession. You had the 10,000 Black interns project, which is producing pupils. They go through the system and producing pupils. There was positivity as a result of the awareness and an acceptance, which was leading to good action. And this has all the hallmarks of rowing back in a way which would be most unfortunate. So I see that my task as chair would begin the conversation to bridge that gap, because it's important that we don't allow culture wars into this space. I was very pleased to read Mark Neal's interview with you in September, where he said that this was a consultation.
You say you're happy to have a conversation with the Bar Standards Board. Is this a conversation in which you say, no, this is no good, we can't accept any of this, go away and think again? Or is there room for discussion and compromise?
At the moment, we would say you have to think again. The profession is against it. This was not a quick response. We didn't lightly come to this result. And we will, on behalf of the profession who were against it, stand firm. But we start the conversation from the point at which we are at one, which is we want the same thing, but we want it to be deliverable and we want it to be clear. And we don't, in the end, think that this is a matter of regulation, by which I mean coercion, because I have reason to be hopeful that persuasion and collaboration has got us quite far, quite quickly. Not enough, more work to do, but for sure, in the last 3 years since our report.
But do you think the Bar Standards Board hears what you say? Is it going to do as you say? Is it going to go away and think again? I mean, you share a building with them. That's the complication of it all. But obviously, there are Chinese walls between the Bar Council and the Bar Standards Board. But do you think you've got your message through to them? Or do you think that they've simply got to go ahead?
Look, somebody said recently, oh, there is the most unedifying clash and difficulty coming. And I don't think it's so. We start from wanting the same thing. Our approach is different. The mediator in me says that I have sat with enough people who share that. So parents often will say, I am interested in Charlie's best interest. Well, so am I, but they fundamentally disagree as to how to achieve it. And it is possible as long as you are prepared to hear each other. So in answer to your question, Joshua, I don't yet know whether the Bar Standards Board will listen to us because I haven't yet had a conversation with them. But what I was encouraged from Mr. Neal's interview with you was that he said, we are in listening mode. We want to hear from the profession. This is a consultation. All of that leads me to believe that it isn't set in stone and they're not going to force this through regardless. In the end, any change will require participation of the Bar Council. We would have to provide, for example, guidelines. We're not in a position to do that because we don't agree with it. So is the BSB going to draft its own guidelines, which will interfere with its independence? You know, there is trouble ahead if this is simply forced through. And my sense is that isn't what's happening with the BSB. We haven't had a conversation with them yet. But I was, as I said, encouraged by what Mark Neal said to you in an interview.
You say there could be trouble ahead. You think their proposals are unlawful.
Yes.
So you might go to court.
Well, again, the mediator and me will leave that as a last resort. I always say to people, you explore everything before you start even thinking that. And at the moment, I can assure you that isn't on my mind. What is on my mind is useful dialogue and a conversation with the BSB.
Because the last thing you want is litigation with your regulator. Apart from anything else, the barristers will have to pay for both sides' costs.
Absolutely. What the barristers want is resolution in a way that allows their voices to have been heard, the equality, diversity and inclusion agenda not to be fundamentally upset, and for the BSB to understand that it puts something out, I suspect, from a good place, as they say, but actually they understand now that it won't work.
Does the Legal Services Board have any involvement in this? They're the super regulator, the oversight regulator. Maybe you can have a word with them and they can influence the Bar Standards Board?
Well, we will try everything within the rules.
And more generally about the Legal Services Board, are they keeping within their lane, or are they going a bit further? They've commissioned reports on non-disclosure agreements, on rule of law, on SLAPs. Is that something they should be doing?
Every time I'm asked that, I go back to first principles. The regulatory framework is fine as far as we're concerned. We're not asking for any kind of review of the Act itself. You will recall that 2 chairs ago, Nick Vinall was at the Justice Select Committee, I think it was November 23, and he spoke at length there about the Legal Services Board, in particular the fact that whilst we were content, it required a review. When the statutory framework was set out, it was plain that that oversight regulator would itself be a subject to review, and we haven't had one since 2017, and we ought to have one, and that is what we are keen to see happen, so that where each of us, the LSB, the BSB, the Bar Council, where each of us starts and finishes is properly understood.
Let's move on. Another thing you want to do is to raise the profile of the publicly funded family bar. Why is that so important?
A number of reasons. I think that over the years, when you say you're a family lawyer, people either think not quite civil, not quite criminal, somewhere in between. Nobody quite understands what we do. So I think, and I'll come to the publicly funded part in a moment, but I think it's really important, and I have a great opportunity to shine a light on what we do in the family world. The family world is not just about parents divorcing or worrying about their children and the future of their children. It covers financial cases. It covers assisted reproduction and surrogacy. We're talking about the welfare and financial issues to do with incapacitated adults, protection of individuals. It's all, all life is here, and we manage it all. It's important that people understand that, because what flows from that is that when we then talk about the challenges we face, there is a sense in which the purse holders think, well, that's not really as important as criminal justice, for example. It's equally important when you understand the work that the family courts are dealing with. We've had some discussions recently about the assisted dying bill. And if that becomes law, the natural jurisdiction would be the family jurisdiction for all the reasons that I said. I mean, there's lots to do before we get there, but that is the natural jurisdiction. So it couldn't be more important. And what are the issues that we're facing in the publicly funded bar? People are disillusioned and exhausted. They are working harder than they've ever done, often doing pieces of work which is simply not paid for. So the way in which we work has changed. It's much more paper heavy and document heavy. So the preparation of lengthy chronologies, position statement skeletons, not paid. if there have been more than 2 advocate meetings when you take over a case in public law cases, you will meet that client and conduct that interview without payment. Technology has moved on in such a way that we get telephone records to look at in cases, lengthy WhatsApp messages, all of these voluminous documents you read for very little payment. The government has an understandable and laudable commitment to halve violence against women and girls in 10 years. And often that conversation is around what can be done in the criminal justice arena. But of course, violence against women and girls is domestic abuse and domestic violence. And that is what's happening in the family court. So again, it is an issue that is topical, and my colleagues and I can assist the government to realise that commitment.
You talk about the way in which family lawyers are paid or not paid in legally aided cases, but one sometimes hears of criminal lawyers who think that the family bar is a better place to work because legal aid rates are higher.
Of course. And what we have to do with that debate is not to it's not competing against each other at all. I have enormous sympathy for my criminal colleagues who are like us, like family practitioners, often working for no money or working for cases that are bounced out of the list and then you don't get paid and so on. It might be relatively better, but it doesn't mean it's good. The rates haven't changed for decades and needs to be looked at. I was very pleased to hear at the end of last week that the government has a commitment to part of the Rottler piece in immigration and housing, so that's a good opening gambit in terms of providing new money, and we very much hope that when it says that in the spring in the spending review it'll look at the other areas, that there will be some funds coming our way too.
Let's move on to the challenges of being a barrister. I think you'd probably say it is more challenging to be a barrister these days than it was decades ago.
In certain ways it is more challenging. I think that the changes in the digital space is good, but it also means that we are more accessible to our clients and those who want us. That's a problem.
They can call you on your mobile over the weekend.
Exactly.
And they expect you to answer.
Exactly. The volume of documents that we receive, if you send a link, in the days when boxes of paper would arrive, my clerk would understand just by looking at it what it was I was expected to do to get a case up and running for a conference, for example. But now a link is sent to you and nobody knows that behind that link are 10,000 pages and get on with it. So there is that. But I think more than anything, we are now more alive to the well-being challenges. When I was a junior barrister, a well-meaning senior silk said to me that if, underlined, if I had a family, I was to come back 6 weeks after every birth because the expectation was to keep the show running. Now, I'm very pleased I ignored her because I was not fit to come back after 6 weeks and I took a full year. So we are much more alive to it. But I think that what I would like to do in 2025 is to begin a conversation where well-being is a part of practice and not something that we go to in crisis. I have been in listening mode as vice chair and I've travelled up and down the country. And that my real sense is that it is accepted now that we need more. So I was talking in a robing room. I simply asked a woman how she was doing that day. She then began to share her difficulties. She was a criminal barrister. She felt that the life-work balance was out of control. She was missing her children, one of whom was doing public exams. And just that question, how she was doing, almost reduced her to tears. To the commercial junior who says, is it possible for my therapy to be tax deductible?
What sort of therapy? Psychological help?
Yes, he was having psychological help, primarily as a result of the sheer volume of work and the expectations and pressures on him. I have spoken to a number of heads of chambers who have been amazed, top sets, who have lost tenants at very junior stages. They've gone through the the rigorous process of securing pupillage. They've been through the pupillage, and then they've said, actually, I can't see this as a way through for me. On the basis that the young bar is the lifeblood of the profession, we have to do better for them. And so I'm looking, with the help of Charlotte May Casey and Sam Mercer at Bar Council, at some pilots to look at how we might be able to introduce a way of, whether you call it reflective practice or consultation, into our work at an early stage.
How would it work in practice?
There are a number of models out there and a number of different skill sets who might do this. So you might have peer-to-peer, you might have groups of barristers across different practice areas getting together to help each other. You might have a psychotherapist. What I want to do is to get it right, because there are lots of naysayers who say, we don't have time to do this. It's going to be too expensive. Who are you to tell me what I need? And so on. And so I'm not going to be prescriptive, and I don't have the answers. I have ideas. And what I'm very pleased to be able to say is that there is a willingness on the part of a number of SILTs and others who will get together in a working group and look at the practicalities for me.
It strikes me that you have to get in before the person is suffering more strain than that person can cope with. You have to get in at an early stage.
Absolutely. At the moment, well-being is either ignored or rushed to in crisis, and we absolutely have to get in front of it. There are the areas such as family law and crime. We now understand that if our clients are traumatized, there is a chance of vicarious trauma to us. So that is well understood, but not enough people are doing anything about it. Do you know, a Silk said to me the other day that when one of her juniors came in to tell her about a sexual abuse case she was doing, she had to stop her because she herself was flooded with her own stuff that day. And so she said that they had to arrange a time when she could speak to that junior member. It concerns me that that was the stress that that person was under. We are working more remotely now. Not everybody's coming into chambers. So that need to talk and share that we used to have, you'd come out of court, go back to chambers, make a cup of tea and download, that isn't available to us. And yet we have a need to share and talk. And so we have to be ahead of this. And we have to make some suggestions with people. So the working group will include the hard to reach as well. So I've got a couple of hard to reach, hardened, I've been fine over 30 years, who are also prepared who are open, and I'm very pleased about it. They're open to have a discussion and a look at what we might do for the profession.
So that approach that, I was tough, I managed this perfectly well, young people today, they're all woke, that approach is there, but nevertheless you say that the people who take that approach are at least open to reason.
Yes, they are. I mean, they can see all around them that things are changing, and they can see that, you wouldn't embark on a career at the bar only to leave it after 2 years. It's been a long, hard road to get here. So the moment you have youngsters saying, actually, the balance is not for me, it's going to take more than I have, you've got to be careful in situation where the bar is top heavy. And we have to encourage people in. We have to encourage people in to be interested in crime and family and commercial and all the areas of work. And we have to help them to make it sustainable from the very beginning.
What about people switching, for example, from the practicing bar, practicing in chambers, to the employed bar for a few years, perhaps when they have family responsibilities, and then returning to chambers? That's something that people have done, but perhaps that should be made easier?
Absolutely. I am completely on board with the one bar approach, the idea that it is one bar. When I qualified, it was almost thought that if you weren't in chambers, you somehow weren't a proper barristers, in quote. That is no longer the case. I was fortunate enough to hear Lady Rose speaking at the Employed Barristers Award, and she spoke beautifully about her career journey, including her work at the employed bar. What we know is that the employed bar, 17.5% of barristers, or the 18,000 barristers, are employed barristers. And they work in a range of areas. So half of them in the public sphere, CPS, GLD, armed forces and so on, and the other half in private practice, solicitors' offices and banks and so on. The work they are exposed to is deep, interesting, and it is often beyond the reach of what you might have at the self-employed bar. They have the finest of training, and it is only right that people should understand what both sides of the profession have to offer and go to where you need to go as you need to go there. The Working Lives survey shows that the employed barristers enjoy a better life work balance. Those who have care and responsibilities have much more support there. And so, absolutely, we must make it plain to people. But it's all about planning. So, before you take that career break, thinking about what you might do as an entry strategy. So, what's the exit strategy? What's the entry strategy before you actually take that break, so that you're putting things in place?
The entry strategy is returning to the bar after a career break, after moving to, as you say, the public service, employed bar, and so on. And that's something you obviously want to encourage as well.
Absolutely. And then if you're ready and you want to then come to the self-employed bar because your children are older or your circumstances have changed, that is possible too.
And we hear talk about building a sustainable practice. Is that what we're talking about, or is there more to that phrase?
Well, a sustainable practice, it is that, but it is also the other thing that is important is making sure that you are a part of how you want your career to change. I think that my Pegasus scholarship, when I was a pupil, I took what many said was a risk in the middle of my pupillage to secure this Pegasus scholarship, and off I went to Canada. When I was a pupil, it was at a time when barristers were not allowed to tap for business or advertise or any of that. So we didn't really plan our careers. We did the next best thing, and the clerk said, "Oh, you're going to do this sort of work," and off you did and did that. But actually, my time in Canada exposed me to young practitioners who were active in their own lives and thinking about how they might make a partnership and the work in the firm they wanted to do, because it was a full service firm that I was placed at. And that really informed me that a sustainable career requires, from really the beginning, to understand what it is that you would want your career to look like. It then, in terms of the amount of pressure on you, is reduced because you say yes to the things that move you along that path and no to the things that don't. It means that you have an eye on your practice. It means that you're keeping an eye on your income. So if you're a woman, for example, you're challenging as much as you can, whether you're earning as much as you can, and if not, how you can make it different. Those are the sorts of ingredients that will ensure that you have a career that's sustainable. It puts you in the mindset of thinking ahead. So if you're thinking of having a break of some description, you're thinking of what that might look like, and you're planning for it.
Many of us remember your namesake, Dame Barbara Mills, QC, the first woman to become Director of Public Prosecutions in 1992. I very clearly remember the day that her predecessor resigned and she moved across from the Serious Fraud Office. You have a year to make your mark as chair of the bar. Spooling forward a year and looking back on the year that's about to happen, how would you like us to remember your contributions? What do you think that you want to achieve in the broadest possible sense in your year as chair of the bar?
I want to open up the imagination of people to see what's possible. I want to, and I'm really keen to draw them into the Bar Council and the work that it does for the profession. And it's already begun, because many, certainly family practitioners, have expressed interest in how you become chair and what Bar Council does more, and have joined committees and so on. I'd like the bar to feel, whether you're working in Newcastle or working in Cardiff or working wherever, you're a part of the machinery and you're a part of things.
Barbara Mills, KC, thank you very much indeed.